Hello, I'm Michael Mayer from VocalWisdom.com, and here we're going to have our next episode of the VocalWisdom.com Masterclass podcast series. All right, so today's class is kind of being kicked off by a question from somebody who actually has been taking kind of an ongoing series of recorded consultations with me. So he's familiar with my concepts, but he's still kind of interested in a question that's been really burning at him for a long time, which is, can we sing any style with optimum function? And as you probably are starting to gather, if you know me at all, function is really my focus, the function of the voice, and that's what I'm really concerned with, and not a particular kind of sound. And a lot of times when we talk about styles, what defines style is the sound of it, right? How are things being expressed? What's the sound that we kind of identify? You know, we can identify a classical sound. We can identify a musical theater sound. We can kind of identify a certain jazz sound, pop sounds, rock sounds, these types of things. So that is style, definitely. And I'm interested in function, which is more of a under the surface sort of thing. And I believe, and this is what prompts his question, is that he's heard me say that style should not really affect function. And that's where people get into trouble, is that they want to sing a certain style of music, and they let that style distort the natural functioning of the voice. And so so that's what we're going to talk about here today. And can it be done? And if so, what are some of the ways that we can do it? Because, for instance, he's interested in singing both classical and rock and pop styles of music. And so in order to do that, he'd like to do it healthy. And I think that's important. For me, I always try to emphasize the fact that's what I'm most interested in, along with function. And the reason I'm interested in function is because I'm interested in keeping the health of the voice, regardless of what you want to do with it. Okay? And so, you know, no matter what you do with your voice, speaking, singing various kinds of styles, it doesn't do us any good to ruin the voice. You know, you can get the sound you want, but if you ruin the voice doing it, what's the benefit in that? We want to have the voice for our whole lives, and that's what I'm always talking about. So how do we do this? Well, first, I always want to say, what is singing, right? Singing is, well, there's a lot of ways to describe just kind of define what singing is, but for me, the way I define singing is vocal expression, musical expression with the voice. Okay, and so really the reason I bring that up is because we need to figure out where we're starting from. And for me, where we're starting from is it's kind of like we're starting from the end, right? Having the end in mind. So the end purpose is to express ourselves musically with our voice. And what does that mean? So it comes down to, really, it starts with words and melodies. Words and melodies. We're telling a story with the words, and we're also infusing it with feeling and emotion and musicality by also saying the words also on a melody, a musical melody. Okay? And so if we can kind of think of these building blocks that we're dealing with, it can really help us. These are concepts that are irrespective of style. Okay? So we haven't gotten to style yet. Singing is musical vocal expression, and that is made up. The building blocks of vocal expression is musical vocal expression is words and melody, infused with meaning, infused with emotional purpose. Okay, so any style of singing should be based on those fundamentals. And these are important because doing those things are what make the body work. So much of the functioning of our voice is really dependent on natural reflexes. The desire to express something is a strong, strong stimulus to the body. And if we're not accessing that, we're not really getting natural function. Then comes style, doing things, maybe pronouncing things in a certain way, maybe, singing with less intensity, singing with more intensity, distorting certain things to a certain degree, pronouncing in a certain way. So it's worth it to kind of figure out what are the defining characteristics of the style you want to sing. And then, because you need to know what you're dealing with, because then you need to make sure, if you're interested in keeping your voice healthy, I'm sure there's plenty of singers that's not really top of their list, but if they're serious, I would hope it is. Because, like I said, you can't keep doing what you want to do if you're destroying your voice by doing it. So with that in mind, then you can start to assess if the ways you go about accomplishing your style are having a negative impact on the health of your voice. So that's our starting point, and I wanted to kind of establish that as a way, because we need to understand how we can assess, right? How do we assess if it's healthy? How do we assess if it's good function? How do we assess if what we're doing is having negative consequences? And this kind of brings up a kind of a rule of thumb that I find is applicable to so many aspects of what we're dealing with, and that is, it's not so much an issue of what we do, it's more an issue of how we do it. And that really applies to this situation of talking about style, because we can do anything we want if it's a natural outgrowth of our expression. We can express ourselves in so many ways if we're doing it in a natural, sincere, spontaneous way. And we can do it with a good, balanced function of the voice if we're following that pathway. What determines if we're able to do it in a healthy way is how we do it, right? So I can tell from some of the other parts of the question that he wrote that I didn't talk about, that he is kind of the perspective that's probably, I would assume, is probably the common majority perspective of that healthy singing is a what? Healthy, for instance, the characteristics that we hear in a classical singer, we can assume would be sort of healthy characteristics. Good resonance, breath support, whatever. Lack of constriction in the throat, so the larynx is, comfortably down, acoustic vowels, balanced pronunciation. These are all true, but they're not necessarily the only way to be healthy, or the only way to be functionally balanced. For me, it's not the sound, it's not the what that determines functional quality. It's the how. How do you do it? So you can, because there's plenty of classical singers that are really not that functionally balanced either. They're not really that healthy. And so the what of it is not the determining factor. So just because somebody sings classical style of singing doesn't make them more healthy than somebody who sings a pop style of singing. The what of it is not the determining factor. The how they do it is the determining factor. It's very, very realistic to say that a pop rock, jazz, whatever, non-classical style of singer could be more healthy than a classical singer. That's not really a big stretch to say. But we tend to notice that, or we tend to assume that that's not the case. We tend to assume that, because we hear a lot of people talk about having classical technique, classical training in order to be healthy, even though they don't want to be a classical singer. They're taking classical lessons. And I've had people come to me with that sort of viewpoint. And I understand it, because that's kind of the way that people assume things are, but it's not necessarily reality. And so how can we demonstrate that? So let's go to the next step here. What is functional balance? What is optimum function? What is healthy vocalization? The place that I always start from is the purity of the vibration. What is the quality of the vibration of the vocal cords? Because that is the originating source of the sound of our voice. So how balanced is that? And we can't really determine that without including also the fact that it's a relationship between the vibration of the vocal cords and the breathing. So what is the quality of the relationship between the vibrating of the vocal cords and the breathing, the breath, the air pressure from our breathing? And it's that relationship that's really the fundamental factor. And the balance of that, the efficiency of it, you know, so is it being, for instance, is the breath being forced out? That's one very common element that we can assess, and we can say, okay, well, if the breath is being forced out, that's not a very good balance, and that's not, regardless of the style of singing, that's not going to be optimum or give us a chance of staying healthy long term. So if we can keep the voice balanced, we can express almost anything we want, even screaming. You know, there's actors that need to scream. And if you scream over and over and over again in a way that's harsh and damaging to the voice, you're not going to be able, whether you're in a play, you're not going to be able to do that night after night. The rest of the evening is going to be affected. Your speaking in the rest of the play is going to be affected by the fact that you scream night after night in a way that's harmful. So skill is important across the board. I would even argue that, you know, we tend to think that the skill of the voice is most needed in the classical singer. And it is, but I think that that's short-sighted in the sense that the farther you get away from classical singing, actually the more important skill is, because you're asking more difficult things from the voice. You know, like I said, so the example of screaming is like pretty far off there. It's not even singing. But like, you know, hard rock and roll, heavy metal, even like death metal, scream metal, these things are really extreme uses of the voice. And if you're doing them in a way that is not balanced, if you're not figuring out a way to coordinate that balance, and you're just overpowering the voice with air pressure, that's really going to set the person up for vocal fatigue, vocal breakdown, vocal damage. You know, it can get worse and worse and worse. So I would always argue that if you're interested in doing more extreme types of vocal expression, it's even more important that you understand the fundamental coordination of the voice, so that you don't completely destroy it. Because if you ruin your voice, you can't keep doing what you want to do. And if you really like doing it, doesn't it just make sense to be able to retain your ability to do it? All right, so that's That's, again, I'm going to keep repeating that, because that is what's most important. Not how you sound, but how do you continue, right? How do you keep it alive? It's like investing. There's an old quote by someone famous, and now I can't think of who it is, but it doesn't matter, who said, "I'm not so interested in the return on my investment. I'm more interested in the return of my investment." Meaning, yeah, I would like to make money, but it's more important to me that I get the money back, that I don't lose the money. And that's what I'm talking about here. It would be nice to sound incredible, but I'm more interested in keeping my voice and not losing that. Okay, so let's think about what are some other key characteristics. Like I said, so we're at the point where we're talking about the balance between the vibration of the voice and the breath. And this doesn't have anything to do with style. So if we can establish that, like what I'm always talking about, if we have that, that's going to wear the voice out. But if we get now, a big part of style is intensity. So as a classical singer, we will sing with a lot more intensity, a lot more concentration of acoustic energy, resonance, of the tone itself, which will produce a lot more complexity. We'll hear as more color, more richness and fullness. Versus or we can even spread a little bit if we keep the balance between the breath and the vibration. But if we do if we do things that are fundamentally disjointed, like leaving the glottis open, and constricting the throat, we hear people sing like that. I don't do that well because that's not something I practice doing, but there's plenty of people that sing that way. What that is when you do that exhalation, you're opening the glottis, and then you're trapping the breath with the constriction of the throat. That's the larger valve that I talk about in some of my writing, and that's not what we want. We want where the voice, the true vibration is the one that's working together with the breath so that it produces vibration which results in sound, and then the constriction doesn't happen. And it doesn't have to be, that's not even good vocalization anyway. It doesn't have to be, big open throat and contrived sort of sound. Like one of the examples that he gave me was like Pavarotti singing a pop song. Any kind of a, Il Divo type of thing where we're singing, wise men say, singing like some pop song with a big fake classical sound. That's not good function. So that's not anything that I'm talking about. We should be able to, we just had St. Patrick's Day, so we have some Irish in the recent past here. Irish songs are a type of song that's been done by all kinds of different styles of singers. A lot of the old traditional Irish songs were performed by classical singers in concerts. So you would have something, a familiar song that's top of my head is like the Rose of Tralee. You'd have, the pale moon was rising above the green mountain, and you have your more complete resonance and a good vibration because you're singing in a concert where you're your own amplification. But you would never sing that way if you were a pop singer, and you just wanted to do an Irish song. Hymns are the same way. For instance, like Amazing Grace. You can sing that classically. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound. And you'd really, you notice the generousness of the intensity because I'm amplifying myself. But if I was going to be sing that more like a contemporary Christian, Amazing grace, how sweet the sound. I don't have a big open throat, but what I do have is a clean vibration, and actually that vibration is a little bit more related to my sweet ooh. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound. But notice that my mouth is still not spreading. I still have a fairly true resonance form. Okay, even more of a pop singer. We're kind of moving through the spectrum, and this spectrum is kind of going more towards speaking. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound. It's getting a little thinner, but it's still vibrating. It's not amazing grace, how sweet the sound. That's breathy, and that's going to start wearing out the voice. That I've consulted with, for instance, right off the top of my head, a jazz singer, who that was her problem. She was singing kind of like this all the time, and that was making her voice wear out. And so that's what I mean. It's not what you sing; it's how you sing it. You could do essentially the same thing. That's like crooning. Crooning, if you actually literally croon, that can wear out the voice. But you can do crooning singing with a good vibration. Ooh, ah. So instead of amazing grace, how sweet the sound. And it all has to do with how you want to express it too. Now, obviously, I'm not going to be able to demonstrate things that are completely foreign to me because I don't practice that. That's not the way that I necessarily feel my way of expressing. So I'm not really, into distorting my voice. Now, if somebody wants to distort, you can distort if you keep the vibration clean. But I'm not interested in doing that. And it's a little tricky. But what I always encourage people to do is learn how to sing first. And the problem is that most people, especially because they don't really approach singing from the perspective of training themselves, right? Everybody can sing, so they just start singing. They hear what has happened on the radio, they imitate that, and then they can think they can sing. Just watch, the first couple weeks of American Idol, and there's tens of thousands of people who can't sing that think they can sing, and those are obviously not even all the people that are out there, because not everybody comes out, right? And so instead of starting with the style, start with the singing. Be able to sing a melody and words clean and true. Then put your style into it once you've established that framework and that foundation. I remember I used to watch American Idol, and that's a great example of this kind of this delusion of how singing is. And you would hear people auditioning, and they're doing all these 100 notes in 5 seconds, and and there's no melody. And I was always, the judges are what they are, but I was always impressed to a certain degree that, like, Randy Jackson would say, "Dog, come on, where's the melody? Sing the melody, and then then do your embellishments." But all you're doing is embellishments, and that's exactly the point. So learn to sing a melody which comes from you, comes from your voice, comes from your imagination. Express something. It's so much more impressive to be able to express something with a simple melody than to have to try to sing all kinds of crazy stuff, or distorting your voice, or doing something extra in order to try to make an impression. And the funny thing is that people do that thinking they're trying to be unique. But the reality is that they're just imitating all the other people doing that already. What's unique is actually singing something straight and being effective doing it. Because that speaks to the heart of the listener. Doing all kinds of crazy stuff, it might seem like that's the style of music that you want to do, but is it really communicating something? Now, sometimes it is. Really good singers can communicate through that kind of thing, through vocal distortion, through embellishments like Beyonce, through whatever, you know, just go down the list of the different sorts of things that you hear singers doing. Good singers make that increase what they're communicating. Mediocre singers make it just about that, and they're not communicating anything. So the reason that can be an enhancement, and that's what it is. It's an enhancement. It's not enough all by itself. It's an enhancement. So make sure that you can sing a melody with your voice naturally and straightforward. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound. However you want to express it, you can change the rhythms, you can do, but first do it just straight. Even it may seem boring, but from that starting point, you're actually doing something rather than amazing grace, how sweet the sound. Obviously, there was no melody there, but that's what we hear so many singers doing. And now I'm focusing on just one aspect of what people do. Obviously, if we're in the rock, kind of more of the rock genre, there's going to be other sorts of embellishments. And you can figure that out on your own. But yeah, think about that. And this applies to classical singers too. Classical singing has its own embellishment. Lots of resonance space, that's an embellishment. Lots of support, that's an embellishment. Figure out how to sing a melody straight and pure and with honesty first before you start embellishing it with more intensity or with more whatever. Okay? So it's not so much what you do that matters, it's how you do it. Bring us back to our fundamental message. How you do it is what really matters. So you can sing any style you want. You may not be as extreme, may not be able to be as extreme as maybe you want to, as maybe some other singers, because other singers are not necessarily concerned about keeping their voice healthy. So they can step over that line, but they'll suffer the consequences. They'll have to cancel shows. They'll have vocal fatigue. They'll have vocal breakdown. They may have nodes. Happens all the time, right? A lot of people love Adele. A few years ago, she had a vocal breakdown, had to have surgery, had to have recuperation time, had to cancel all kinds of stuff. Classical singers, Ramon Villas, people love them, did great stuff, very exuberant, very passionate, but overextended, stepped over that line consistently and broke down the voice, had to cancel a whole season, had to have, I'm not sure, I can't remember if he had surgery, it's been several years now, but he had to go through a long period of recuperation and rebuilding and getting back. He's gotten back, but you be the judge for yourself if it's really any better or not. And he's going to be dealing with that all the time. And so my message is, think about it before you start breaking your voice, and consider how you're going to accomplish what you want to accomplish artistically, expressively, whatever, stylistically, before you start doing it. You know, even singers who seem like they were singing very gently, Bing Crosby, you know, Frank Sinatra, all these great singers, a lot of great singers in the past had a lot of vocal problems. So, you know, even Caruso and famous classical singers had vocal problems. So it all has to do with the demand you're placing on the voice and how effectively you're dealing with that demand by keeping the balance of the voice. Are you overstepping that balance point? And we need to always be watching out for that, regardless of the style that we're singing, because it's a challenge no matter what. So yes, the answer is yes, it can be done. We may not be able to do all of the extreme stylistic things we want to do, and a lot of times it's okay to step over that line for just a moment, you know, for a climax, for, you know, a big note, or for a moment here or there, but don't do it all the time. Don't make that be the way you always sing, because then you'll get yourself in trouble. Okay? So I hope this has been helpful. I hope this kind of answered the question, and also it gave you something to think about, depending, regardless of the style of singing you like to do, and it gives you something to think about and how you're going to be able to do that for your whole life and do it as effectively as you want to. All right? So expression, words, and melody, it all comes down to that. And if you do that well, you'll be able to sing the style of music you want to sing. That's my firm belief. All right? Thanks a lot. We'll talk to you again soon.